So, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Professor Milton Mermikides.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening to everyone here and online. So, 15 billion miles above us, silently hurtles the Voyager space probe. It was launched in 1977 with a mission to visit the planets, and after that, along with its sister vessel, Voyager 2, to send out a message to whomever might find it. In that aim, aboard the Voyager space probe was this golden record with this beautiful inscription which basically says where we are and how to play the record. And this lovely inscription to the makers of music, all worlds, all times. And encoded into that record is a collection of images describing what we are biologically, where we are, what we know technologically and in terms of science and maths. But we also want to say who we are, and what better way than to use the language of music. Now, this team of people on the right had the awesome responsibility to choose what music from all our glorious catalogue we send out to space. And inevitably, it was suggested that we should send the music of J.S. Bach, but not everyone agreed. Why? Because that would just be showing off. The quote actually comes from this essay here. But eventually they decided to put 3 pieces of Bach, no Beatles because of copyright, go figure, and along with quite a commendably diverse set of music, which is now heading out beyond our solar system. And we should ask ourselves, if an alien encountered it, what would they hear in it? What would they understand? What sort of intelligence would they find? And to define intelligence, sometimes we think of it as the ability to do things physically, but also the ability to build systems, abstract systems that are adaptable, such as language and music notation, so that we can problem solve in various situations. But alongside this this brain intelligence is an emotional intelligence, the ability to perceive emotion in ourselves, in others, to communicate it. A sort of sensitivity and empathy. And it's said that music somehow lies right at this intersection between what we'll call the brain and the soul, just as a shorthand, of order and reason and logic and of emotion and expressivity. And here lies music. But there's something about Bach's music that hits this pivot point so intensely and accurately that sends off this other continuum between deep personal meaning and the infinite, the eternal. And when everyone talks about Bach, we see these 4 corners of self, soul, brain, and eternal. This is from the Gresham survey, so this is what you guys think. Physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. Could not put that better. Some other quotes here, heaven on earth. Better than any blood pressure medication, I like that. Of course, the pantheon of Western art musicians had similarly high things to say about it, but note the use of immortal, father, and everything. But Bach's music inspired beyond Western art music into jazz, who perhaps saw the harmonic structures and as vehicles of improvisation and saw a kindred spirit there. This lovely quote from Nina Simone talks about purity, emotion, and sound, and the eternal. And into musical forms that Bach couldn't possibly imagine, electronic and pop music. I love this quote, algorithms of emotion. It's just perfectly on that cusp between thought and feeling. You might have heard of this guy who adored music and said this of Bach's music: listen, play, love, revere, and keep your trap shut. All good advice, I think, for lots of people. And even the most skeptical philosophers soften a little bit when it comes to Bach, as if its music as alone is some kind of argument for the divine. Brahms said he would lose his mind if he could compose as well as Bach did. So these are not ordinary 5-star reviews. So it's odd that with all these stellar reviews, during Bach's lifetime, he lived a very provincial and hard life, really. Down on earth, his music wasn't wandering this far. In fact, most of his life was constrained to a very, very tiny patch of ground in then Prussia and Germany. This area here, to give you an idea how small this is, the longest journey he took was by foot. 250 miles to go and see a concert of Buxtehude, which shows both his commitment to music and how geographically constrained he was. And not only geographically constrained, but he was constrained in terms of time. I've tried to put together what a working day would have been like for Bach with the duties he had to conduct at his job in Leipzig. And it's very likely that most of the pieces we know and love from that period would have been done before breakfast and after dinner. Imagine what he could have done with a little bit more time. But still, he was stoic, and he used to sign his sacred works, at least, with STG, all for the glory of God alone. But that's not a very satisfying answer and a picture of Bach. He, like all of us, was fraught with vexations of life. Orphaned at age of 10, he went to live with his brother, became a chorister, and then got his first gig at age 18, teaching organ and composing in Arnstadt. And although he was a chorister, he was no choir boy. We have these lovely minutes of a council meeting complaining about Bach's behavior and the number of indiscretions. For example, he returned 3 months late from that fateful journey from the concert without an apology. The choir complained that he played too many strange tones during accompaniments, confusing them. Jazz musician. He took the opportunity of the sermons to sneak down to the wine cellar. Nice move. Or inviting an unknown maiden up to the choir loft to, quote, make music. But the most fun of all, he used to brawl with students and the locals, famously with this student called Bach, who challenged Bach to a duel. Why? Because Bach had the audacity to call Bach a zippelfagottist. I know I dropped the Z bomb, I'm sorry about that. And obviously you don't know what this means, so apologies for the profanity, but this is the translation. A mediocre bassoonist. It's the worst kind. And Bach's irritation lasted his whole life. This is a letter he wrote to his childhood friend, complaining about his final job, his final post. So many things against him, so many obstacles. The supervisor had no interest in music. The position paid him much less money than they promised him. There was no overtime, and the cost of living is high, and the family is growing. Nothing much changes. So this would be fine if he was revered in his lifetime, but he wasn't. He was begrudgingly admired, apart from few people. And so this famous quote from Johann Adolf Schieber, whose opinion we, of course, all care deeply about now, said of Bach's music that it was turgid and somewhat impressive, but overly done, and he would do well to basically sound more like Schieber. But of course, Bach left his mark, and he left it in many ways. We have a couple of objects from Bach's time. This is a wax seal he put on his letters from a signet ring, and a goblet from the 1730s. And he actually designed this beautiful ornate symbol on it. And as ever, there's more to Bach than first appears. If you look carefully, there's this symbol. I don't know if you can see it, but there are his initials. And this is typical of Bach. 2 layers of meaning entangled together in symmetry in a way that is ornate and pleasing. Maybe you can see it now. He did other similar translations. In the German notation system, the notes didn't go from A to G, they went A to H. So he was fortunate enough to have a last name that spelled out a melody. B-A-C-H. And for you tonight, I've managed to have these 4 notes recorded on Paganini's original violin, which would have been made during Bach's lifetime. So thank you, the city of Genoa and the LSO and Simon Jew for that. And this beautiful sinewy chromatic melody can be represented actually on 4 different staves, which means there's another level of symbolism here, this cruciform, 1 dot, 4 notes. And that's not the only translation that Bach did. He also took these letters and found their alphabetic positions, 2, 1, 3, 8, and added them up to make what's called the Bach number, 14, which had a special significance of his. I also think that it might have had significance too, because those numbers are closely related to his birth date. So Bach signed his name in various ways, in his music, around his music. And here's a nice example. One of the few portraits of Bach we have, you see him looking rather austere here. If you look closely, that's a very inconvenient number of buttons on his jacket. How many? 14, of course. And this was an ancient idea, stemming from ancient Greece to Rome to Renaissance and the Baroque era, that there was some sort of parallelism between these domains. Something could exist as a piece of poetry and as architecture, as numbers and music. And if everything that Bach did was for God, and we associate the balance, order, proportion, and symmetry with God, then we should find similar qualities to Bach's music. And we do indeed. For example, we could take one single note, let's call it C, and write a piece in a major key and a piece in a minor key. But then we could take that pair principle again and write a prelude and fugue for each of these keys. And then do the same for a chromatic pair, and then complete this to create this collection, which of course is book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. But he didn't stop there. This pair principle he completed 20 years later with a second identical book, as if the first book was a prelude to the second. And this idea of harmony and proportion exists within music itself. If we take a string and divide it into different lengths, the whole of the string, half the string, the second to the third proportion, then we get a series of intervals which sound harmonious. And the essence of the tonality that Bach used. However, creating harmony on earth is no mean feat. This familiar cycle of fifths, which is used in tonal music with 12 chromatic tones, is built by using a fifth. But if we use a harmonic fifth, 3/2, by the cruel fate of mathematics, we overshoot. Such a bummer. It's close, but it's not quite right. Same if we use major thirds, 5/4, we undershoot. And so there's always a compromise if we have 12 notes. If we wanted pure fifths, then one of them has to be narrow. Ooh. If we want pure thirds, then some keys sound sonorous, but because of this wide gap at the end, others don't. Yikes. And Baroque composers knew this. They had to control these deviations in order to have 12 tones that they could make music with, particularly if they wanted to modulate and be polyphonic. And there were a number of systems that Bach knew very, very well. Velotti's sixth comma system, or Werkmeister, who was a friend of the Bach family, who had a number of systems. So when Bach wrote the Well-Tempered Clavier, which is, as I said, in every key, it was very much on his mind what temperament to use, because even though they knew about equal temperament, they didn't use it. So in fact, all the keys would sound different. But we did not know what temperament he used, so we don't actually know how it should sound. But in 2005, a theorist noticed something on the front cover of this manuscript. If you notice here, where it says clavier, there's this bonus C. What's that doing there? And it connects to this scroll above it, which looks decorative at first, but then you notice some of the gaps are different, some of the swirls. Could this be a cycle of fifths? It certainly works out if you twist it round and align each of these symbols to various commas, then what we get is a temperament that Bach might have used. This is conjecture, and you'll see a little triangle whenever anything is not fully accepted by the community, so I don't have to keep mentioning it. But he certainly used a temperament, and if it was this one, it would make a subtle difference. Let's see if you can hear it. Musicians, maybe, equal temperament. Little flatter, more seated. So maybe prelude number 1 would sound more like this. But crucially, all the keys would sound different. So Bach wasn't so much writing in keys, he was writing for these different keys. See if you can hear the difference between equal tempered C sharp major and this swirl temperament. Listen. Can you hear a slight color change? D major. So small, but it has a significant change. And what I love about this is that, if this is true, then Bach actually told us what the temperament was all along, hidden in plain sight on this autograph manuscript. Now, Bach was a master of what's called contrapuntal harmony, which I'll explain in 45 seconds, which will save you 3 years. And it's the idea that musical ideas can do more than one thing, just as letters can. So when Bach wrote, he was balancing 3 main goals. One is to have motifs, little melodic ideas that were memorable, and so memorable that they could be changed and transformed and still recognized. But he could also write horizontal lines, like taking a melody for a walk, that always would make sense. And lastly, he would make sure that they would all work together at the same time. Any dissonances would make sense and be resolved. And it's really as simple and impossible as that. All you have to do is make sure you have motivic coherence, horizontal coherence, and vertical coherence. There you go. You can go now. And the most distilled form of contrapuntal harmony is the canon. Because what you have with a canon is a series of phrases that work in succession. But then they phase against themselves. So motifs become vertical harmonizations. And they start to stack up. And with a round, you might end up with this perpetual loop. And in fact, that's one way of writing a canon. You could write a series of phrases that work together and then flatten it out again. But a canon can also wander, like Bach wanted to do. It could carry on phasing, but then you could introduce new material underneath. So over time, you would traverse musical material, just so long as the adjacent ones worked. You can think of it as traveling over a surface, a musical landscape, and these 3 voices going on a pilgrimage. And so long as they make sense in those areas, you can go to travel to these lands. So I'll demonstrate this with Pachelbel's Canon, who was actually taught Bach's older brother, and J.S. Bach greatly admired and knew his work. So we start at the beginning with 3 voices, just heading down this surface. and one slips off to a new land. So much character. This is a lovely moment. Look how they cross and do a little leap. Oof. Maybe this is how we should notate music, really, because this is how it feels. Bounces. Heavenly. Note that pair of scissors. That's going to chop one of them in two to have two voices. Here we go. How do we land together? Well, we better build in some shortcuts, some ways so that they all coordinate in a satisfying way. And Bach knew this way of writing very well, and he adored canons. In fact, he was so intrigued by them that although they were considered quite a sort of simple way of writing, he saw some potential in them. Take this portrait here. What Bach is holding is not a prop of one of his scores, but actually a piece that he loved. He loved it so much that he used it as his admission piece for the Society of Musical Sciences, which was this elite group of composers who believed that music could be more than mere entertainment. It had a maths and a science behind it. Handel and Telemann were in the group. Apparently, Bach waited to join, even though he was always invited, so that he could be the 14th member, of course. So this thing, why would we be proud of this simple thing which looks like a GCSE entry? Let me explain. So this actually comes from these canons that he wrote after he finished the Goldberg variations. In fact, they were only discovered in 1974. He just put it as an afterthought in one of his manuscripts, where he would take the Goldberg variation ground bass, those 8 notes, and write canons around them. Just on one page, but there's more than meets the eye here. Oh, how many did he write? 14, of course. So let's take the first one here. That looks like just 8 notes, which is what it is. But this is known as a puzzle canon, which means there's a solution in there. I don't know if you can see it in the score, but what's this? A backwards time signature and key signature, which means play this backwards. And he's written it so they work together. Now, Bach's musical insight saw that if those interval works that way, surely they will also work upside down, in mirror form. And that was his second canon here. Again, you'll notice this backward symbol. Can you see those 4 repeat signs? That's not normal. It's a little clue. And they work together. So Bach's warming up now. This is when he gets to work. So he realized now that he can have that ground bass rotated against itself and add another canon on top. Itself a rotation. If you don't understand the notation, just enjoy the visuals. And canons can start at any point. He wrote this beautiful one, which is like a chase, just one beat behind the first. So it's like in hot pursuit of it. You'll see it catch up now. So beautiful. And you see the character of these entities, not stale notational symbols. He could do this with chromatic notes also, aided by rests. Can you see the gaps in the surface here? Hop. so Bach was building these structures in his mind. And so this takes us to this Canon triplex, which he proudly presents in his portrait. This is not a scrap of paper, but a slice of infinity in his hand. An endless canon, not one canon, but 3 superimposed canons. It's not one of his grand works, but it's one of my favorites. Just the idea that he heard the potential that any musical phrase could exist forever. And although he managed to work out how to write this down on paper, in fact, there are many ways of representing it. You could take canon number 5 and put it on translucent film, curve it, connect it to itself, and read it from any side. But because it's a Canon duplex, you need to do it with the other side. And you have this beautiful interlocking pattern where a musician could read it from any angle. News of Bach's prowess, of course, spread across the land and was heard by this zippelfagottist, I shouldn't use that word lightly, King Frederick the Great. In fact, he had redeeming qualities. He was an enlightened monarch, as they go. He was an accomplished flute player, in fact, well, that's what people said, and a composer, and a patron of the arts. But he had a darker side. He liked to surround himself with these artists, and I'm sure admired them and supported them, but he also liked to put them in his place. Voltaire has this quote that says, "When Frederick says you are my friend, he means you are my slave. When he calls you my dear friend, he means you mean less than nothing to me. And when he says come to dinner, he means I feel like making fun of you tonight." And he invited Bach repeatedly, having heard about his ability not just to write contrapuntal music, but to improvise it. And Bach finessed these invitations away, but because his second son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, CPE Bach, was now leading King Frederick's court musicians, and CPE Bach just had a son, Bach used the opportunity to go and accept an invitation. And so he took what was the last long trip of his life to go from Leipzig to Potsdam, the palace there, to visit the king. And when he arrived there, he would have been greeted with this sort of scene. Frederick the Great playing with his court musicians, and in attendance, poets and mathematicians and philosophers and dignitaries, his second son, court musicians, and some world-class musicians. Franz Bender, who's still remembered today as a virtuoso violinist and teacher, and this shadow figure in the corner, Quantz, who is still known by flautists today. He was the king's teacher, and his material on playing the flute still resonates today. I mean, he literally wrote the book on playing the flute. And by that, I mean he literally wrote the book on playing the flute. Thank you very much. No, thank you. That's a A-level dad joke there. But it seems that the invitation for Bach to play was somewhat of a trap. Because as soon as he got there, King Frederick said to Bach, "Oh, come join me." And in front of everyone, he says, "I've composed this little theme here, and I wonder if you could improvise a 3-part fugue using it." Now, Bach was excellent at improvising fugues, but fugues are malleable. They tend to be short, clear, and bendy. But this fugue is nothing but. And it seems that, in fact, the King Frederick himself might have commissioned someone to write a really awful fugue subject for Bach. Maybe even Bach's son did it. So he played him this. So far, so good. This is super nasty, because not only does it make sense as a fugue, but it's very hard. It's okay to receive one that doesn't make any sense, because then you can just reject it out of hand. But this one has the shape and the contour and the tonality of a fugue, but these chromatic descents and the rhythmic placements are nasty. However, and we have documentation of this, Bach just repeated it back by ear. Carefully, at first probably, buying himself time to work out what his next move would be. And his job is to add another voice, which repeats the melody, usually at the fifth. So the other voice has to now go somewhere else and complement it, which he did expertly. He's not done yet, because he needs a third voice. So he has this little interlude and finds his place to enter the third voice. Here it comes. It's hard to explain how hard this is, just to compose with all the time in the world, but to improvise it in front of these people. Not only did he manage to do it, but he did it with flair, because he knew that King Frederick was more into modern Baroque, seems odd to say that, a more poppy style. And so Bach knew this, so he started to put these flourishes in. And then these syncopations that you might find in the music that King Frederick were like. So at this point, King Frederick's face probably looked something like this. Impressed but annoyed at his trap having failed. And so once Bach was done, to great applause by everybody else there, King Frederick demanded that he then improvise a 6-part fugue to this, which is just ridiculous and impossible. But apparently he did improvise a 6-part fugue to a subject of his own choosing. And then the rest of Bach's trip there was involved King Frederick showing him around his newfangled pianofortes, and maybe Bach had a moment to meet his grandson before making his final journey back. Now, Bach could have got on with his life, but something got under his skin about this meeting. And within 2 months, he had completed a 6-part fugue. He had done the impossible, which is just astonishing on any subject. But that wasn't enough. He wanted to sort of wrangle this knotty subject for all that it was worth, and he put together what's now called the musical offering, dedicating it to the king. And it's got this inscription on front of it, which means in Latin, the theme given by the king with additions resolved in the canonic style. As ever, there's more to Bach, because the acronym spells out this word, which is a defiantly early Baroque composition, saying I'll do what I like, essentially, beneath the surface. And it also means to search out or to seek. And if we look inside the musical offering, what do we find? Well, the 3-voice fugue that Bach improvised, the 6-part fugue that we're listening to now, and a whole host of incredibly beautiful and clever canons and material, and some pop stuff for the king to perform. It's astonishing. This fugue goes on for minutes and minutes, and we're only on the 5th voice now. It's gorgeous, this blend of thought and feeling. I'll give you a flavor of what else we find in the musical offering. This canon à deux, it's called, a unison canon. It's one of the simpler ones, but it's just delightful. Let me explain what's happening here. What we have is the royal theme in the bass, and then Bach has written this glorious melody that works perfectly with it. But as ever, there's more than meets the eye. This melody is written in such a way that it also works against itself. It's like a delay pedal on a guitar. And the glorious thing, of course, is that they all work together. This blend of thought and fiery emotion. This is known as an endless or a spiral canon. It's a canon that keeps modulating up a tone. And he writes here, as the modulation rises, so may the king's glory. But these are not Eurovision modulations which suddenly jump up. They're done in such a way that you don't notice the seams. Like an Escher piece of art, they seem to blend into each other in this impossible way. You'll see when this red one comes round, we'll be up to D minor. And there's the loop. I didn't hear it either. And this famous crab canon. You'll notice here that it's only 2 lines long. But it's just a remarkable piece of engineering. It works forwards as an adaptation of the royal theme. Lovely. But it also works backwards. You can see the reverse partial canon signature there. Perfect music. Most people would go home at this point, but Bach has worked out a way that they work backwards and forwards together at the same time, interlocked perfectly. And there's a real magical moment when they cross, where your whole worldview falls apart. So I'll put a little crustaceous marker there. And you'll see what happens to you as they pass. And again, there's another way of representing it. You could take the page, fold it, twist it into a Mobius strip, and just run alongside either side of it. There. Listen how it ends. Should you want it to. All these fugues and canons Bach packaged up and had sent over to the king at Bach's own expense, along with this painfully obsequious message to the king, which I guess he felt he had to write. And it actually pains me that this man who could hold infinity in his hand had to bow and scrape to a mere monarch. But if you look beneath the surface, you might detect a seething, defiant knowledge that Bach was better than him. Now, as far as we know, the king did not acknowledge receipt, thank him, play it, as is the case many times with people with possessions but no values. Yet Bach used the skills he found in here, and also the idea that he could perhaps write music more for himself. And his time was limited, largely because his eyesight was failing. By the time he was writing the Mass in B minor, I've consulted an eye surgeon. Based on his cataracts, it would have looked something like this to him. And the cruel state of affairs is that it blurs the center of your vision. Can you imagine trying to work like this? And in desperation, as many people with cataracts did in that age, Bach turns to others for help. And wherever there is a lack of medical knowledge, there is a charlatan happy to fill it. And ours of that day is John Taylor. Apologies to anyone who shares his name. He features on William Hogarth's The Consultation of Quacks on the top left there. And he reportedly blinded hundreds of people. It's said that his preferred way of working was with his right hand on the patient's left eye, regardless of which eye was affected, which goes to show how much care he took. And he liked to use, pigeon blood for disinfectant. So Bach paid an extortionate amount of money that he spent months earning to pay this zippelfagottist to work on both his eyes, and unfortunately he went ahead and it led to his complete blindness and most likely an infection that killed him. And that, if that's not enough, reportedly John Taylor did the same to Handel a couple of years later. Good job there. You must not like that music. So Bach, in his remaining years, dedicated music more to himself in a way. The art of the fugue is written for no specific instrumentation. It's abstract. It's not of this world. And it's based on not this external subject, but one that he chose, Bach himself chose. I think of it as a musical offering to himself. And it's the height of contrapuntal harmony, these pieces, these contrapunctus, these canons that he writes. And there's one here I'll draw attention to, which is this fugue in 3 voices. You see, the art of the fugue is considered unfinished because of this piece. You can see how it tapers out at the end. There's no final bar line. And the inscription here is from his son, who worked with King Frederick, if you remember, saying, at the point where the composer introduces the name Bach in the counter subject of this fugue, the composer died. So I have to say, correlation does not equal causation, but just to be safe, don't write your name in the counter subject of a fugue. But there it is, circled in red is Bach's name, as if he was signing off with this final piece. So let's listen to that moment and the profound silence afterwards. And this is how the story is often told. Bach dictating in his blindness this final fugue to his son, writing himself into the music and disappearing to the maker. But as ever, there's more to Bach. If he was blind, then why is it in his own handwriting? Perhaps this was a puzzle for others to complete. Some people have noted that there are 41 missing bars, which is one of Bach's numbers as well. So perhaps this was the final trick that Bach played on us, a final act of expression. This is all conjecture, of course, but it's quite hard to escape the number of the fugue that this ended up being. So I started this lecture talking about these 2 sides of thought and feeling, of brain and soul. But in Bach's music, we hear something more. This play, this mischief that comes in, doing things that are unnecessary, essentially, a rebellion, a wanderlust. something that's the essence of being alive beyond just thought and emotion. And it's these three elements, crucially, that make up Bach's music. Woven together. Perhaps this is why it feels so both personal and eternal. It's the part of us that likes to do things that aren't necessary, to play jokes, even just to ourselves. Who knows what other things are waiting to be discovered in his music? In fact, that's maybe a way to live, this mixture of thought, feeling, and permission to cause mischief and want to wander off for months. Maybe that is the essence of a meaningful existence. And a message that's worth sending out. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.